I still remember where I was when we had the Bay Area earthquake in 1989. I was in my front yard in a house I grew up in just outside of Sacramento. And as soon as the earthquake happened, my mom came out and asked me if I felt it. And I didn't really feel it much at all. But what I remember, I mean, besides the World Series being postponed, of course, were the pictures of the aftermath. Now, I imagine that for those who lived in the Bay Area, they had a heightened fear and an awareness of anything that even remotely resembled an earthquake. Right? I imagine insecurity could go through the roof, knowing that one minute you have your home and the next minute it's gone. Now, what I've just described to you are the circumstances for the church of Philadelphia in Revelation 3. They had frequent earthquakes. In fact, so much so that some of the people in that city were so fearful and felt so insecure that every night they would actually leave the city and then return to it during the day. And that's what makes Jesus' words to them all the more beautiful. So I'm going to read just the first half of verse 12 in chapter 3. Here's how it reads. The one who conquers, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will never go out again. Now, did you notice the language on Jesus's part? The one who conquers, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will never go out again. In other words, a pillar is stable. It's not subject to the shakings of this world. Even though you may come and go from your earthly city every night, I will provide a place of permanence and stability for you. There will be no need to come and go in this city that I'm providing for you. Now, interestingly enough, the church in Philadelphia was one of only two churches that did not receive a complaint from Jesus. Now, there's a common theme between them and the church of Smyrna, the other church that didn't receive a complaint. Now, Smyrna was the persecuted church, while the church of Philadelphia is described as a church that has but little power, yet they've kept Jesus' words. Now, let's contrast this with a church in Laodicea later on in chapter 3, and notice how Jesus addresses them. In verse 15, Jesus says, I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either cold or hot. Now, hot water had therapeutic benefits, and cold water was refreshing. Yet the church in Laodicea produced no benefits because they were lukewarm. Now, interestingly enough, they thought of themselves as having everything and lacking nothing. They had plush circumstances, unlike the church of Philadelphia. See, our human nature is to do everything within our power to surround ourselves with the circumstances within Laodicea. Yet, Christ has promised us that it is when we are surrounded by the circumstances that the church of Philadelphia was, that this is fertile ground for spiritual growth. Well, we are not to go out actively seeking trials, neither are we to buffer ourselves from the type of discipleship that will naturally lead to hard things. Now, before we close this devotion, I want to bring you back to a challenge I gave in last Friday's devotion. In chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation, there are 7 letters Jesus has written to each church. And the structure of the letter goes like this, right? First, there's a Christ title where Jesus introduces an aspect of his character to a church. After the Christ title is a commendation, so what they're doing well, then the complaint, what they're doing wrong, then the correction, the course of action to fix the complaint, and then the consequence, either positive or negative. Now, we as humans are very similar to these churches. We have some commendable things and some things Christ might complain about and want to correct. So I want to encourage you to write a letter to yourself as honestly as possible that you think would resemble what Christ would say to you. Now, I want to encourage you to use the structure laid out in chapters 2 and 3. And once you write that letter, I would love for you to let me know about your experience.